So welcome to this week's of Crap No One Tells You. Today, I have Linda Beane from the Kellyanne Dolan Memorial Fund with me, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nonprofit world and the crap no one tells you about that.
Mhm.
So let me start by asking you the basic question. So what's some of the crap no one tells you about actually working for a nonprofit?
Oh man, with 30 years in the field, how about you come out of school and you've got these grand ideas? You are gonna you're idealistic. You're gonna save the world. You're gonna be the magic pill and you're gonna, eradicate domestic violence and you're, you know, full steam ahead.
Gung ho and ready to go.
Mhm.
And then,
Then red tape and bureaucracy just smack you in the face.
oh, I can imagine you guys have a lot of
Yeah,
that.
there's a lot of it.
So what about, let's say, let's take an example. So we wanted to start a nonprofit today. I get this idea. I want to do something. I'm going to go change the world. How long is the process, for example, just to get a nonprofit up and running?
It depends which community you're in. I worked a long time in Norristown, and there was a mentality, really honestly, where they were not letting any other 501(c)s register because they were concerned for the area and the residents that lived there and felt that it was attracting a certain population. And so imagine that you're in a community where there really is great need in diverse populations. And it's a great area to start a nonprofit because you've got all the county offices, you've got many services that you could we'll get into collaboration. What a great fancy word that nobody tells you what that crap really means. But so the process is, bogged down. You think about it now with the pandemic. It's a long, cumbersome application. They're going to weigh out what's in the community. Is it saturated? Do we really need this? A lot of hoops you got to go through.
So you left the door open. Tell me about the collaboration.
Collaboration. Well, I've worked.
It's a word that I hear thrown around a lot when it comes to nonprofits. They're like, oh, we're collaborating and we're doing these. And I'm like, what do they mean by that?
So, it's the Willy Wonka, right? Golden ticket chocolate bar.
Okay.
Right? We identify, a common issue. Let's say we're going to just throw out homelessness. And the idea is you get all the key stakeholders around the table and everybody just rolls up their sleeves. They leverage their time, talent, and treasures, and they work collectively towards progress and improvement of ending homelessness. But what people don't tell you about are egos, the masks that people hide behind in terms of credentials. And then when there's money at stake, there goes collaboration because everybody's kind of in the sandbox and they all need a piece of it. So collectively, we say we want to collaborate. Often it ends up, how do I take care of myself?
So it starts off as a great idea and then it becomes every man for himself,
Yeah.
is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, there are great examples of it, though. I mean, I will say to you at the Dolan Fund, we align with other nonprofits that we have overlap in mission. And it doesn't matter if at the end of the day, a family is being helped, how that's being done, if it's another nonprofit that, is the lead and getting the dollars and doling those dollars out.
Right. Because ultimately it's about fulfilling the mission and doing good, not necessarily whose name it was done under,
Exactly.
which is the way we think of how nonprofits should operate. Right.
Mhm.
Um, so let me touch on another subject since you indeliberately brought it up, fundraising. That's a fun one, right? When you're a nonprofit, money just comes pouring in from businesses and corporations and people are giving left and right? That's what people think, nonprofits. That's how
That
it
is what
works, right?
people think, right? You are a small business. You would like people to patronize you locally. There's this, grand mindset that communities are giving to local charities. It's definitely not the case. When you look at the structure of schools, they're given to, national charities where maybe 10 cents on the dollar is actually going to help a human being. The rest of that 90 cents is going for, the fancy office, the operations of
The
all
administration
that sort of stuff.
okay.
Yeah.
So do you think nonprofits, well, you already answered the question, but should be more, why do you think local nonprofits are overlooked by businesses, by corporations or individuals? Is it because they don't know you exist? Is it because
Ding, 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 ding. Okay. 47 years. Kellyanne Dolan Memorial Fund.
Mhm.
Born right in Montgomery County, serves 3 states. I meet people every day in my role as community engagement manager that have never heard of us. And it's, you don't have the resources internally in a lot of nonprofits here. You're generally operating with, skeleton staff, all wearing multiple hats that they maybe were not trained for or credentialed in. So it's not having the troops or the dollars to invest in marketing campaigns that would be picked up on a billboard, on, you know, you sitting down watching your favorite comedy, a 9 o'clock hour, and
you're
you
not going
see
to
the
see it?
Jimmy Fund, you see the
Right.
St. Jude. You're not seeing the Kellyanne Dolan Memorial Fund. It's
It's not showing up during Super Bowl.
not not showed up during Super Bowl.
Right. So generally as a nonprofit, I mean, I've worked with a handful over the years. I know quite a few, and some are definitely better at raising awareness as far as getting money in the door. But I'm assuming, just like any other business, it's a hand in hand proposition. The more money you have coming in the door, the better known you can become and the more you can help your local community. So where in that process, it's the chicken and egg game, right? Like, which came first? So I know this isn't the only nonprofit you've been with ever. You've done other things. You had a previous life before this. So what are one of the things, if I was starting a nonprofit and I was going to hire someone to do your position or someone to do marketing, what are the things that they're going to be like, where are the bottlenecks in the process? Is it funding? Is it committees? Is it boards? Is it regulation? Is it a combination thereof? Like, what holds you guys back from being able to do this stuff?
Yeah, I think you hit the head on the nail, the nail on the head.
I've done the other way around too. Didn't
When
work very well.
too many cooks in the kitchen,
Okay.
is often, I think that's, a common theme in terms of, look at everybody comes from the heart in wanting to care for their community, do good for others, but they all have kind of an opinion or the way it should be done. And, it depends on the nonprofit, but there's a tendency of being stuck in, well, this is the way we've always done it.
Right.
And not really understanding that the climate, the times have changed. Fundraising has gotten incredibly competitive. When we started at the Dolan Fund almost 47 years ago, there, if you looked in Montgomery County to see the number of foundations that were registered, there were a handful.
Right.
And now, it's a big lake where it was a little guppy pond, when we started. So too many cooks in the kitchen, I think, is that common thread. Sometimes, we come from the background of human services, whether we're social workers or psychologists or in that humanistic field, and sometimes we don't have the technology skills. I mean, that's a big piece that holds nonprofits back. One of the attractive things now is seeing the young cohorts coming out of colleges. I mean, I look at my kids who are 27 and 22. I mean, they grew up with a computer. All right. So it's being able to attract and employ people that have the heart for the mission, have the skill sets, specifically technology and knowing more about how to use that technology as a marketing vehicle and being able to pay a competitive salary. There you go.
That's the catch, isn't it?
That's really the catch. Where there's great workplace flexibility and all of that, it's not always a living wage for someone coming out of college. They've got debt they want.
Mhm.
They expect to be at a certain place, the stage in life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we all do.
Uh,
So as far as day-to-day operations of a nonprofit, I mean, it pretty much runs like a business, right? You have a CEO or an executive director. They have different titles in nonprofits. Same job, different title. That was one of the things I learned
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
they would connect me with someone and I'm like, but your title says this. You're like, but that's not what I actually do. I'm like, okay. So we're just operating on made up titles. Um, One of the things that I found is some nonprofits, and this is not, I'm generalizing,
Mhm.
but the decision-making process for certain people within the nonprofit became almost a committee or a board approval process for everything, right? So we work with a nonprofit, for example, that eventually pushed it through that any purchasing decision under $5,000 did not require board approval.
Mhm.
And overnight, stuff started getting done.
Yeah.
Like they just started moving along. We started getting things done. And on the other end of it, they saw the increased revenue from all that work. Why? That's a broad question.
Mhm.
Why is the process of getting basic things through a nonprofit often so difficult? Like why do they need, I know you said there's too many cooks in the kitchen, but why are so many things that require board approval or committees? Or if it's being run like a business, the last thing as a business owner you do is get 7 people involved in a decision that requires one,
Right.
right?
Right.
Why do nonprofits operate almost the other way around?
Yeah. I mean, in theory, we've come a long way to operate more from a business model. I mean, I've been in the field for 30 years. I can tell you when we started, it started with a logic model back in the early, probably around 2000. Um, I think historically nonprofits are run more like friends and family. And so the growing pains to get it to that business model, look at it in the business world, it's not personal. In nonprofit, there still are, this mindset that people's feelings get hurt, toes get stepped on. And so we dance around that in between the line of being more effective from an operations model of running it like a business so it can be sustainable. And there also are those checks and balances, right? Because there's a lot when you're receiving funding, you have regulations and things to satisfy the funder, whether that's coming from government funding, which there are a lot more compliance requirements, or a generous private, you know, donor. And you want to make sure the promises that you're making are being followed through on. And I think there also is a mindset that nonprofits just get money doled out and there are not always, ethical decisions being made or the money is being used in a way that it wasn't intended for. So now there are all these extra check and balances. And, I could tell you in mine, anything over $1,000 requires 2 signatures on it.
Right.
And then you also alluded to it, like committees. Our structure is we have an executive director who reports to a board of directors
Mhm.
of 16 people. And there's an executive committee that is making, primarily the major decisions. But each of those committees, fundraising, governance, strategic planning, IT, and I'm forgetting the fifth for us, but each of those are comprised of other board members. And I think the bottom line is there's this always this mindset like, well, we can get this done cheaper. We really want to be able to allocate every penny that we possibly can to our families in need. So it comes from a good place, but what boards historically don't realize, you got to spend a little to get a lot more in return. And you mentioned fundraising, so I just want to hit that for a second. The future of fundraising for nonprofits is rooted in peer to peer, and peer to peer fundraising requires leveraging some dough up front. You got to get a platform. You got to get a fancy platform that is going to cost you upwards of anywhere from $7,000 to $10,000, which, you know, gives us agita. But what that turns around and does for you in terms of efficiency, and being able to replicate
Mhm.
those companies out there that have a good track record in those platforms, they can show you organization after organization where they took that organization from base level and where they're at now.
It's basically a common thing known in business is if I can put a system in place that makes us more efficient, that makes us better, that improves our deliverables, or sometimes will even allow us to cut a job, um, that pays for itself pretty quickly and keeps us in a competitive edge. I mean,
Right.
can imagine if I still had my original iPod, trying to do marketing work, it probably wouldn't do really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
But technology has advanced. And I think that's another thing that people don't realize is there is a huge support industry behind nonprofits that are making a lot of money, but also are providing some phenomenal tools for you guys. And in general, I'm not sure that your average board member or your average committee member understands how valuable these tools are. Um, I went through a board certification training, um, which is probably another episode by itself. But one of the things that struck me is it was a 16-week course. We covered a topic every week, and the topics like governance and that stuff, I was like, okay, I totally get this. But we spent 2 weeks on reading basic financial statements. And I'm sitting there looking at the other attendees that were with me there, and I'm going, half of these people own businesses, yet some of them are asking questions. If you don't understand how a basic financial statement works, if you don't understand the basics of business, should you be on a board? Because you're making business and governing decision whether you like it or not. Just because it's called a nonprofit doesn't make it any less of a business, right?
Right.
So how do you guys, or not you guys specifically, but in general, how do nonprofits go about trying to select what board members they bring on?
That's a good question. I mean, there is a lot of thought to it in looking at what are the centers of influence and the industries that need to be at the table to run it more from an operations perspective of a business. And, I can tell you for us in this current framework, we are comprised of people that come from the financial service industry. When we look at compliance and legal issues, we have that representation. We certainly have the representation for the heartbeat of who we are in terms of our, mission, having people that come from that healthcare sector, as well as the IT industry, kind of going around the table and thinking of who we've got, and we have tried to match up with our different committees, what skill sets need to be there to effectively lead it and be able to set the plan and goals in motion.
So if you're setting up a nonprofit, you really need to strategically think about who do you want on your board and what purpose do they serve?
Absolutely.
So what would be the top 5 if I was setting, let's say I started a nonprofit. First of all, how many board members should I have on my first board? And what would be the top 5 people that I should try to get from my board?
Well, there's a wide range of opinions on that. I'm going to go with, a dozen
Okay.
for board. Um, and then you've got to be looking at, okay, first of all, what's your mission and who are you serving? And then you're going to pull from, that industry. Let's say, for instance, you're starting a nonprofit that's focusing on truancy for a particular county. Let's just, you know, talk about the dirty word, which is diversity,
Hmm.
right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. You're seeing it across the board everywhere right now. So that's a piece of it right now. You need to be diverse, as well as bringing the profession, diverse in the professionals that you're bringing to the table. So I'm thinking if you're starting a truancy program, you want somebody that's got a history or is currently working in law enforcement. You want the educator that's working in and day out. All right. You want somebody at the table that, really understands youth that are troubled and has a track record of putting some supports in that can get them to a different level and along a positive path. Um, I think you need finance people, you need attorneys, you need somebody strong in technology, and you need people that come from the field. And you want that to look like the United Nations, as blunt as possible,
Right.
you know?
So kind of to summarize that, it sounds like you need 5 people that are involved in that community, give or take. You need another 5 that have some kind of technical expertise that will, or but law, IT, whatever it is. And then you have 2 that you can kind of move around as needed in order to kind of optimize your board for getting the people that run it to talk to the people that actually do it. Right? That's kind of what I'm getting from that.
Yeah, and I also think, you get the cerebral person with the brain, kind of like the think tank mentality.
Right.
Like the person that thinks outside the box, not in, day out operations, but has a vision for growth and sustainability.
So kind of the entrepreneur type
Mhm,
person that
mhm.
that really doesn't want to be on a board. Just saying.
Yeah, you're
I,
right.
I don't know a lot of entrepreneurs
No,
that
that's why they're in. Yeah, right. No,
um but I mean if you are, because I guess that's the problem is, I shouldn't call it a problem, but that's one of the things is, if you are starting a nonprofit, that doesn't necessarily mean you are entrepreneurial, right? A lot of times you are doing it because you believe in the cause, but you don't have the entrepreneur. You have some of it because otherwise you wouldn't be starting it.
right.
But I think a lot of people get bogged down in the beginning because they don't approach it as a true entrepreneurial enterprise. We have these misconceptions once again that, well, no, but that's not how nonprofits work. That's not how they should work. They should be this, shiny beacon of hope.
Right.
And when it boils down to it, it's down and dirty business.
Yeah,
Like it is no different than me marketing a service. It's no different than me churning a profit. The only difference is where that profit goes.
absolutely. And, it's driven a lot by emotion. A lot of, nonprofits are being born. It's deeply personal. It's to, you know, what, whatever concept you're starting, there's some history there and some experience there. And so how do you separate out, the past experience and the trauma and have a forward vision of really what's needed to be successful and really help whomever with your mission?
So that brings up another question. Um, do founders of some of these that do it because of a certain kind, and I know this is a general question,
Mhm.
is there ever a point in time where they actually become the bottleneck rather than helping the cause? Like they get too hyper involved that they actually bog the nonprofit down, because this happens in business all the time, right? You have
Yeah.
someone that starts the
Yep.
business and then they have a hard time letting go of the reins. And now their business is stuck because they become the bottleneck as the business owner or the founder, whatever they are. Do you, do we see that same or similar type of trend with nonprofits where the people starting it kind of needs to let go and let other people take over?
Yeah. It is a common thread. I mean, I come from an organization that has a founder, Peggy Dolan, who we adore. And, we've been in business for 47 years because of the profound loss that she experienced of a child. So it's delicate. Yes, I don't think the founder is intentionally trying to bottleneck, but I think for those of us that are currently working in the organization, we're trying to dance between honoring that loss and legacy and everything that the founder has built. Um, we got jobs because she lost a child. I'm just going to be straight up, okay?
Yes.
And but also understanding sustainability and how to move this organization where it can last almost another 50 years. There are some really difficult conversations that have to be had. Um, and we do it with ultimate respect. And there's a fine line, like certain territory we're not going down, but other areas that will push because we know it really is for the betterment. More families will be served in the way that they need to be in this modern time. But yeah, you're right on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I noticed when working with nonprofits is when you work with a business, the end goal is clear, right? Like higher net profits at the end of the year, more payout to owners or shareholders, whatever it is. When I work with nonprofits, it is all emotion driven. Results are not measured only by the dollars that you had at the end of the year. A lot of times it's the achievements they accomplished. It's the number of families helped. It's the severity of the cases that were helped. Like whatever the ultimate goal is of the nonprofit ends up being the biggest measuring stick. Now, in some cases, there's a direct correlation between amount of money, brought in
Right.
versus ability to help. But I have worked with a couple of nonprofits where there wasn't necessarily a direct correlation, where one year they were able to help a greater number of families using lesser funds than they had done the previous year. So that became um, a point that was discussed actually quite heavily, was what would be some alternate options where they could deliver more help utilizing less money, which I thought was fascinating because in the business world, that becomes once again, how can I make things more efficient so that I can
Sure.
do more of this at a same cost, right?
Yeah, but I think you can also flip the script because you had me thinking we actually flipped that. So where we served, you know, 10 years ago, we serve about 1,000 families a year through our financial assistance program.
Mhm.
Now we serve thousands of other families in other capacities. But we flipped it where we were giving a more sizable grant to a less number of families because we felt that that could be more impactful for them. And you're right. I mean, we're not good at it. You know, all these fancy words that we're now adapting to CRMs. It's very right. It's very qualitative how you measure the work that you're doing. And what we're doing now is trying more in my role is really trying to engage um, the families that we serve. No one tells our story better when it's a family that you may think your $200 that you gave the Dolan Fund, big deal. Like you maybe trimmed your entertainment budget
Right.
that month, you know,
But you kept the kid's respirator running for another month or two.
or their gas in their car now, and
Well,
they got back and forth to the best quality care to keep their child as healthy as they possibly could or to receive the treatment that they needed. There's no parent that said it better for us. Like, you know, you don't get it, but what you have done allows us to come up for air for one brief moment before we tackle the next challenge. So that's I'm getting a little off topic, but when
no, but
yeah,
I think that's important, because there's a handful of nonprofits. One that comes to mind is St. Jude's,
mm,
where you get to see the impact of the people you actually affected. You don't get a thank you postcard from the executive director, or like you get to see kids on TV that your money actually helped, right? And I think that's one of the things that people often forget about is when they are donating, whether it's $5, $10, $200, whatever that number is. Yes, we are aware we're helping someone,
mhm,
but I don't think in general people feel the emotional gratification when they realize, no, 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 you may not have just helped someone. You literally changed their life for
yeah,
a brief moment of time, or in some cases for an extended period of time, right? Sometimes you change
yeah,
someone's life.
yeah. You give because it pulls at your heartstrings. You need
It's marketing
it
101.
to evoke, and that makes me want to go back and say when you talked about the board,
Mhm.
I mean, you need the person who comes from the marketing industry that can show you the vehicles to best tell your story. What no one knows about St. Jude, which this would probably
Mhm.
blow your mind, and I don't want to misspeak on the number. You have this image that this is like hundreds of times. Do you know it's a 36 bed
Yeah,
hospital?
I was going to say it's like 30 or 40
Yeah,
beds, whatever
yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Which is not dissing.
No, no, no.
Have kids,
But they take on like the most
extreme
extreme
cases
cases
of
that
kids,
otherwise wouldn't. Yeah. So like it's,
which is
yeah,
incredible,
yeah,
and you tremendous amount of admiration. But that's a perfect example of me saying to you, now they are saving kids' lives.
absolutely.
Don't discount that for
Absolutely.
a hot second.
It's, they go back to the model of spending an exuberant amount on a small number of families that desperately need it versus spending small amounts on a large swath of population that
Yep.
may need a little less help. It's
Yep.
two different models, right?
Right.
It's the, Kia has to sell, call it 20 million cars a year, while Bugatti has to sell 10, right?
Right.
But it comes back to it's the same as with any other business. There's a model. Who are you helping? How much do we need? So it all
Yeah,
balances out.
absolutely. You know, the other thing I was thinking about, the thing that nonprofits, nobody tells you that. All right. We're talking about a lot about money. All right. But there's a lot that you can do for whomever you're serving. I'm just going to throw the Dolan Fund out as an
Yeah.
example. All right. You want to empower them and not enable them. Is the $500 you're giving them going to make the difference? Yeah. For that moment that they can pay their electric bill that day. Sure. But what else can we link them with where they can learn to be able to navigate the system and advocate for their child and their family? You know, one of the things I'm going to throw out is we're offering a series on empowered financial strategies for someone who lived it in having two siblings, one with mental health, with Down that works for a private equity firm and is certified and credentialed and has started her own business that shows family all the things that they don't know, where there are financial resources for them or other things that they might need, how to set up a special needs trust, those sorts of things. So nonprofits are so focused on, okay, the $10,000 grant, now we can pay, $10,000 out in family benefits. But how do we measure the 4-part series that are offered to 20 families where they understand how to create a sound financial plan for their child for the future
Right.
and measure that?
So it comes back to the old story of, you can feed someone, but if you can teach them how to hunt, how to farm, how to be sustainable, you may have achieved more than just throwing money at them, so to speak. Like,
Absolutely.
so do you think nonprofits in general should take more of that approach where we're not only giving someone the help they need immediately, but should also help provide more of an educational donation, so to speak? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think what I'm going to say to you, I think there are a lot more individuals and families that would access social services. There's a mindset, well, we're not in that bad condition. We don't need a handout. There's a lot of pride associated.
Correct.
But yeah, if there's a way to empower them to handle their own business, and, maybe in the process out of that could come something revolutionary, like we could reform a system
Right.
that's so broken and dysfunctional in the first place. So I'm all about that, empowering families and individuals to be their own advocates. Look, there's a lot of nonprofits. I come from a long line I spent my first decade in the field of domestic violence as an expert witness for DV trials, as a national police trainer, working in a shelter. We sat around several times a year. We couldn't wait for the day that our prevention programs on teaching people about models of healthy relationships when we were out of a job, when somebody was not being physically, emotionally, financially, psychologically abused anymore. So there's a lot of us in nonprofits that would like to see
Working on the preemptive.
working on going out of business.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, on that note, I want to thank you for coming in, and I'm sure we'll have you back. There's
It was fun.
wouldn't surprise me if we've got more questions after this one, but we will put your information in. We'll put information about the Dolan Foundation and all that stuff. So if people decide they want to give to you guys, it'll all be there. So thanks for coming in, and we'll see you soon.
Great opportunity. Thanks, Gummy.